Jesmyn Ward. So we're going to start this conversation, and we're going to talk about the South. I'm really curious. I haven't spent very much time in the South. I think all of your books take place in the South. Am I correct with that?
Yeah.
Okay. What about the South, other than the fact that you grew up there, draws you to the region, and why is it important for your work?
I think that for me, like the root of my desire to write about the people of the South and to write about the South as a region is definitely my family and my community, right? I know that is not, that's not as common, I guess, as it was, I don't know, 50 to 100 years ago, but all of the members of my family, on both sides of my family, my maternal and my paternal side, they're all from the South. They're all from either Pasquotank or DeLille. They've all lived there for as long as I can remember. And the kind of place where I live, like, it's very centered around family. It's very like the experience that you live is very rooted in community. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think that when I was growing up, I didn't see much fiction that took place in that world that I knew and that I loved. And so when I grew older and committed myself to writing fiction, I wanted to write about the experiences of the kind of people that I grew up with and the kind of people who were in my family and the kind of people who I didn't necessarily see reflected in the fiction and create nonfiction that I read.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So when we say the South, it's kind of like it has a connotation to it, much like the North. I grew up in the North. Can you talk a little bit about how the idea, the false ideas of what that means of the South, and how you feel like your writing can either mitigate that or at least provide a different point of view?
That's a difficult question. I think, I attended university here in California twice, and then also spent some time in Michigan. But I think that coming to California for undergrad was a real culture shock for me, because when I met people, in my freshman year and, became friends with people and told them that I was from Mississippi, like there were all these preconceived notions, I think, that they had about the South, and especially a place like Mississippi. And honestly, some of those notions are based in fact. There's fact behind it. Mississippi ranks pretty near the bottom of the lists, of numerous lists, right, regarding sort of education, quality of life. Mm-hmm. And so I could understand, I think, why they seemed so surprised, I think, that I was from Mississippi and in the same space with them. Mm-hmm. I don't know. So I try to write about Mississippi and about the South and about like the truths that I understand. What it's like to live in that kind of place. I try to reflect that in my work, but at the same time, it's important to me that the sort of universal, very human experiences of the people that I'm writing about, that is also present, right? Because I think that the presence of, of all of those sort of terrible realities of living in the South, I think that can sometimes drown out the human, right? That can sometimes erase the human, and people look at the South and they just, especially a place like Mississippi, and all they see are numbers and statistics, right? And they forget, I think, that there are real people there And so I try to amplify the human in my work while still creating fictional worlds that are rooted in reality, if that makes sense.
And essentially giving, if I hear you correctly, like giving life while also problematizing the area and kind of facing the facts of the area, but through this sort of, I thought your work was very, I believe your work is very lyrical in the way that you write, but giving sort of credence and giving a voice to all of these characters. I read somewhere that that in all of your books, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're all based in this one fictional town. Is that true? Okay.
Bois Sauvage.
Say it one more time.
Bois Sauvage.
Okay. I didn't want to try and say it. Okay, what's behind that?
The fictional town that I write about is actually a fictional version of my hometown, which is called DeLille, right? But I guess before DeLille was sort of given its French name, it was known as Wolftown.
Okay.
And I don't know the reason why it was known as Wolftown. But when I decided that I wanted to, to take the town that I knew and sort of write about a fictionalized version of it, I wanted to do that because I felt like it would give me a certain sense of freedom, right? Because I didn't have to adhere to the geography and the facts of the place as much.
Right.
But I wanted the name of the town to reflect some of that wildness of the original name of Wolftown, and to, I don't know, communicate something about the dangers of living in a place like that. And so that's why I chose Bois Sauvage for the name of the place.
Yeah, I found that to just be really interesting. I'm not sure if I know another author who utilized the same place, but in your case, different time, different decades, different centuries. And do you feel as if it's like a memory thing, so a familiarity of a place so that you can explore the character rather than, I think you said, having to learn the geography of where you're writing? Is that part of it?
I mean, I think I just wanted to be able to exercise my creativity and sort of indulge in my imagination. And I wanted to be able to incorporate this sort of spiritual reality into the physical reality. And so I think that writing about, doing that in a fictional place, I think that it made it easier for me to do that, if that makes sense.
It does, and the level of freedom that, because you've made this place up and you're not attached to someone else's idea of what that place was or should be. It makes perfect sense. I have another question here about the South. We all know that the South is actually very segregated, even today. It has been historically. Let Us Descend combines brutal realism with fantastic elements. I did not write that sentence, but it's gorgeous. What inspired this combination, and were there any concerns with using sort of the fantastic and or spiritual? I actually found it to be much more spiritually related. Were there any sort of problematic moments around this, kind of combining those worlds for you?
I don't think so. I mean, I've been curious, I think, about incorporating more spiritual and fantastic elements into my work. I think that's been a desire that I've had, a desire that's been present from the beginning. My first novel, which is called Where the Line Bleeds, was very rooted in reality. And my second novel, Salvage the Bones, was also very rooted in reality. But there's this moment in Salvage the Bones where so one of the main characters in Salvage the Bones is this kid named Skye, right? And he has a pit bull that he loves very much, and that he also fights, right? Or he trains it to fight. And so there's this moment in Salvage the Bones where Esh, who is the main character, is this young woman, where she watches Skye sort of go off into the forest with China, with his pit bull, and he's training her, right? And all of a sudden there's this sort of chorus of dogs and they're all barking at the same time, right? She doesn't see them, but she can hear them in the forest, like surrounding her, and in the community surrounding her. And she doesn't really know what's going on. It's just something that she notices, right? And so in that moment when I was writing it, I thought, the writer me sort of rose up out of the fugue, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, of immersing myself in this world and creating this. And I was like, ooh, something magical or mystical or some spiritual, something is happening in this moment. And I wonder what it is. Part of me wanted to leave Esh and go out and figure out what this strange, interesting, weird thing was. But then the trained sort of writer part of me was like, nope, you can't do that. You have to stay in this moment with Esh. This is Esh's story, right? You can't go there, right? That's not part of this story. It's not part of this world right now. But I wanted to, right? So I just sort of tucked it away. And then in Sing Unburied Sing, my next novel, I thought, well, I'm going to explore this, right? Like I really want to incorporate a sort of magical, spiritual element into this world. And I think, I've thought about it a lot, and that it's very important in Let Us Descend. And I think that part of the reason that it's so important to me is because, so when I was growing up in DeLille, in my hometown, where I'm from, people tend to have children young, right? Which means that when I was growing up, many of my great-grandparents were still alive, right? And because family is so important and because community is so important, my mother, my grandmother, they would bring, we would visit with family all the time. I'd visit with my great-grandparents all the time. One of my great-grandparents lived right up the street, right? So I would walk up there by myself and sit on her front porch with her while she was shelling pecans or snapping peas or whatever, right? And so one of my great-grandmothers would always tell us this story about how after her husband, my great-grandfather died, he came back and he visited her as a ghost or a spirit, right? And he told her never to remarry. That was part of the conversation. He told her never to remarry. And she didn't. She never remarried. Yeah. And she would always tell us this story. And whenever she told us that story, we took it as fact. Right. Yes, people pass away, and after they pass away, they can return and they can visit you and they can communicate with you. And so that's something that I grew up believing and that people around me believe. Another thing is, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, my mom's mom, when she was born with, a midwife delivered her, and when she was born, she had a caul over her face, right?
She had a what?
A caul, something they called a caul. It was a film over her, over her head. And so I guess babies who were born with this caul were said to be able to have some sort of spiritual understanding. It was said that they had a certain sight, right? And so when I was growing up, my grandmother, she had the sight, right? She would have prophetic dreams. She knew when people were pregnant. She knew when she would warn us when she thought that people were in danger, like, and we sort of we took it as fact. We understood it as fact. And so I think that part of this, it's a very long answer to your question, I'm sorry. But so part of what was going on when I wrote Letters to Sin, and also when I wrote Sing and Buried Sing, is I wanted to reflect some of sort of what I understood about the spiritual world, right? And the way that it informs this world and is intertwined with this world.
That's right.
I wanted that to be reflected in my stories.
And for African American community, this is not an odd conversation,
Right.
and for many other communities. But this idea of a higher self, having nothing to do with religion, but having to do with the spirit and having access to the other world, or when someone crosses the veil, like this is traditional. This is a traditional conversation within the African American community. That actually is a really great segue, because I want to talk a little bit about Aza, the character. She was complicated for me. The entire story was beautifully complicated, but Aza was a complicated character for me because while I wanted to see her as the guide, the grandmother, and like factually the grandmother, but spiritually the grandmother or the guide, she was also, I saw Annis kind of struggle with her a lot about if she's trustworthy, if she was there for her. Who is Aza in this story for you, and how is she the fantastic? Is she the spirit? Obviously, naturally, but kind of, if you could kind of tease out like that distrust between the spirit world and the natural world for Annis.
For me, Aza was the spirit of a hurricane, right? She's a storm spirit.
Right.
And and when she encounters Annis's grandmother, whose name is Aza, right? She covets her in a way, you know. And so after Aza, Annis's grandmother, passes, she takes her name, right? And she says that when she passed over the ship that Annis's grandmother was in, right? Because Aza was being transported, right, from Benin, right, to the Americas, that she heard Aza calling out. And so she said, you know, like, you called me, right? But I didn't want her or any of the spirits who populate the world of the book. I did not want them to be solely benevolent, right? I didn't want their only function to be, I didn't want their only function to be to save the characters, right? Like, I wanted all the spirits, and I think Aza more than most, I wanted all the spirits to be complicated, right? I wanted them to conceal. I wanted them to have their own motivations, right? I wanted them to want things. I wanted them to, there are moments where Aza, where the spirit, where she lies, right? In order to get what she wants, right? And so that's part of the reason that Annis distrusts her, right? And that she debates, I don't know, but like she debates like how far she can trust Aza. She knows that, I think that she thinks that she's probably her best hope for deliverance. She understands that she needs her help, I think, to get out of, to get from under the yoke of chattel slavery. But she knows that Aza, she knows that spirit is complicated. I don't know. I mean, I think I wanted those spirits to be complicated because I just believe, like I think back to that story of my great-grandfather visiting my great-grandmother, right? And, what did he want in that moment, right? What were his motivations in that moment?
That's right.
Seems sort of selfish and sad, right? To tell my great-grandmother
that she shouldn't marry again, right? So that she lives the rest of her life without that sort of romantic companionship. Right, beholden to that.
To a previous relationship.
Right.
I mean, I like that idea of, a lot of the spirit world kind of characters in novels are guides.
Right.
They're this sort of higher self, and to guide people to their higher self. But you complicate that by making her, out for herself.
Right,
And
right.
making sure, and having that sort of relationship, the main character having the relationship, having to understand and kind of tease apart when she is for her and when she is obviously for herself. It kind of reminds me of another character from another author, but I don't think I won't go there because I know a lot of people don't like to be compared to other authors, so I appreciate that. So let me ask you a couple of other questions here. So this was your first historical novel, and so you kind of already answered this, but the sort of the trajectory of your novels and your characters and that realism and wanting to get to the mystical, fantastical. But can you talk a little bit about how you prepped for this? And I am always interested in how people research for these kind of books with so much granular detail, beautifully granular detail. How did you get yourself there? What was your process?
If I could go back in time and do it again, like research again, I would have definitely done it differently.
Okay.
Because first of all, when I stumbled across the idea, it really was the character Annis, right? When I stumbled across her character and realized that I wanted to write a story about her, write about this enslaved young woman, I knew that I knew nothing, right? I mean, I grew up in Mississippi. I attended high school in Mississippi. The kind of education that I got in Mississippi, even though it was a private high school, it was equivalent perhaps to a solid public school in another state, right? Okay. I definitely learned little, I learned next to nothing, right, about American, chattel slavery, about the civil rights. I mean, I learned nothing. And so I knew nothing, and I didn't take many history courses in college either, right? So I was like very, very much like starting from zero, and so I think that I went to a bookstore, and I picked up the first book that I found that was about slavery, or that had anything to do with slavery, and I just started reading, and then I would look at the index. Of course, I did not use pen or pencil, but I had millions of Post-it notes. I grew up as a library reader, right? And so I can't mark.
And no dog earring.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't deface, but to me it's defacing a book. I can't mark up a book, but I had millions, hundreds of, seems like Post-it notes everywhere, right? And so I would, I would then go to the index, and then that would lead me to another book.
That's right.
And then I'd read another. The next book would lead me to another book and another book. So I just read, and one book led me to another, and I did that for at least 2 years.
Well, I'll have to say, as an aspiring academic over here, that's exactly how we do it. Yeah. We read someone else's work, go to the citations, follow the bouncing ball to and find the sort of lineage, the academic lineage of whatever you're studying. So I don't see any problem there.
That makes me feel better, but I always say that if I had the opportunity to go back, I would have sought out the librarians, and I would have relied on their expertise.
Where is it? Where are we in here? Okay.
Yeah, I would have done that. But I read and read and read and read it, but then I realized that I got to, like I said, I read for 2 years, and I hadn't written a thing. And I was under contract, right? So I got to a point where I was like, you know what? You will never know everything about this time period and about this institution, right? And about this place. You just won't, right? So if you wait to write to begin, like if you're waiting to know everything, you will never write anything. And so I was like, I'm just gonna start, and if there are more things that I need to know, I'll research as I go. And so that's what I did.
Well, I'll have to say, as someone who read your book, I don't see that it was so thorough. And that's what I was saying to you in the back. It felt like you embodied her. It felt like you had to separate yourself from yourself in order to like really embody Annis. So if that's the truth, I don't think many of us saw that. So thank you for it. Let's talk a little bit about Greek mythology. And so you do this book was inspired by Dante's Inferno. Is that correct? And the idea of dissension, right? You are quoted to say, "It infuriates me when work of white American writers can be universal and lay claim to classic texts while black and female authors are ghettoized as other." Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I experienced that sort of, I don't know, refusal to believe that, you know, the kind of people who I write about could be aware of classic Western texts and also use them to understand their lives when I wrote Salvage the Bones, right, which referenced the Medea, I'm probably mispronouncing that, myth, right, and Jason and the Argonauts. And so that was the first time that I felt that people reacted to my work in such a way, right? Because people would say, well, you know, this is a 15-year-old, like, poor black girl in Mississippi. Right. What is she doing reading Edith Hamilton's mythology? I read Edith Hamilton's mythology when I was in the 6th grade.
Right.
So if I did it, you know, and I grew up poor and black in Mississippi, why couldn't this character who I'm writing about, why couldn't she do it, and why couldn't she find something in it to help her navigate her life, right? And to figure out, you know, how to move through the world, to figure out what it means to be a mother, to figure out what it means to have agency or not have agency, or to have power or not have power, right? And so that makes sense to me, right? Because I think that, of course, I mean, that's something that every one of us, right, regardless of where we come from or of our, you know, sort of race or gender or anything, right? Like, we all use story, the stories around us.
That's right.
In order to help us to understand our lives and to navigate our lives. So with Let Us Descend, it made sense for me, like when I was thinking about this enslaved young woman, it made sense for me, right, that she was doing sort of the same thing that Esh was doing in Salvage the Bones, right? That she's sort of looking at the world and trying to find references, right? Trying to find stories to help her understand what she's going through and to help her navigate what she's going through. So for me, it made sense that she was listening at the doors, right? Like listening to this tutor, you know, who's instructing her half-sisters and sort of snatching these little bits and pieces, right, of stories and language to try to better understand her world. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It makes sense to me.
You know, when you talk about Medea, and I might be mispronouncing that, something that has always stuck with me. Someone said to me a long time ago, never judge someone by mispronouncing a word because they learn the word by reading it.
Right.
Okay, so I don't know if it's Medea or Medea, but we're gonna go with it.
Right.
I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about something that's very personal for me and my profession. This idea around slavery as a subject, but really about this current climate we live in, about what is being called DEI or CRT, which is actually a law framework. It has nothing to do with academics per se. And, you know, your book is really challenging. It's talking about some really challenging moments in our history. That happened.
Right.
What is your response to this world of censorship and this current climate of censorship and banning books? I talked about that last year. We continue to talk about that in my field, in library science and librarianship. What are your thoughts there?
It infuriates me and it saddens me.
That's clap worthy.
It was, erasing, banning it or censoring it or erasing it does not, it does not erase it. It does not mean that, just because you prevent someone from reading about something, that doesn't mean that it didn't happen, and that doesn't mean that the repercussions of it happening are not still present here, in this moment and in this time. It just, part of the work that I think that my books and that my stories are doing is that I think, hopefully, that they are giving people, all types of people, right, the tools that they need, or some tools that they need, or keys, right, to understand and to better move through and better navigate their own lives. Part of the reason that I am grateful that I had the experience of writing Let Us Descend is because I feel like writing Let Us Descend allowed me to make my way through my grief and better understand my grief, and better understand what it means to wake up every day and choose to live even though your circumstances and what you may be living through are very painful, right? These things that you have no control over. So, as a little bit of context, my children's father, my partner, right, died in early 2020, right? We had two kids, two children together. They were 7 and 3. And at that point, I'd only written maybe 2 chapters of Let Us Descend. I kept rewriting the beginning over and over again. I'd write 2 chapters, I'd throw them away because they were terrible. I'd write another 2 chapters, I'd throw them away because they were terrible, right? So I rewrote the same 2 chapters for 3 years or something. And then my partner died. The pandemic hit, right, in March, late February, March. Everything shut down, and my grief was so overwhelming that I thought that I might quit because I wasn't writing anything, right? And the way that I work is I try to treat writing as a part of my daily routine, like brushing my teeth or taking a shower or exercising or just something that I do every day, right? And I wasn't for months and months and months, to the point where I thought, because I was just so low, right? And, the life that I thought that I was going to live, suddenly that wasn't the life that I was living, right? And I despaired, I think. And so I got to this point where I asked myself, because I talked to myself, I was like, okay, is this it? Mm-hmm. Like, maybe you've written your last book. And then the immediate answer from the other, or from my partner, or from, I don't know, some part of myself, was no. The last thing that he would want, right, is for you, the grief that you feel, right, at his loss, for that to silence you. And so I was like, okay, that's it. Then I'm writing this book, right? And so I think it was the fall. It was maybe August, September of 2020 when I really dove into the book and began, really seriously writing every day, hours a day, but with a new understanding, right? Because what was I think part of the reason why I had such a difficult time writing the beginning with those, in those previous years, was because I couldn't understand Annis as a human being, because I couldn't see past my own preconceived notions about what it meant to be an enslaved person, right? And when I dove back into the book after I lost my partner, and as I'm like sitting with that deep grief and experiencing that deep grief, like I didn't understand everything about Annis, but I understood something very important about Annis, that she's a person who is experiencing grief.
Grief and pain. I saw where you went there.
And I needed to sit with her in that experience, you know, as she is losing her mother and losing really the life that she had known, right? And sit with her as then on her journey, she experiences fresh grief after fresh grief after fresh grief. She's creating relationships with the people around her, and she's losing them one after another, right? But I needed to sit with her and to journey with her and to descend with her in order to begin to figure out what it means to live with grief, right? And what it means to incorporate that grief into your understanding of the world. And then what it means to embrace that grief in a way and decide that life is worth living even as you bear that weight. So in some ways I feel like writing Annis's story and following her through her own journey with grief, that it saved me in a way.
You unsilenced the grief,
right?
You gave it life through the character, but she carried yours, and you carried hers.
Right.
Wow. Oh, got lost. Okay, let me ask you. Let me ask you a follow-up question, because I also wondered when you said you had a difficult time getting there. So I think you have a lot of people in here who are writers or who aspire to tell stories and write stories and share stories. I cannot imagine the pressure you must have felt winning all these big awards, and then tragedy upon tragedy, personal tragedy, upon national, worldwide tragedy, and then trying to come back and writing yet another masterpiece. Oh, everyone assumes you're going to write another masterpiece. I cannot imagine that pressure that you put upon yourself and people likely put upon you. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah,
No pressure.
No, right. I think I first experienced, became aware that would be a part of my life after Salvage the Bones won the National Book Award, right? And no one thought, I didn't even think, right, that I would win, to the point that when I understood that I would have to go to New York for the award ceremony, and that's when we would all find out. I didn't even ask anyone in my family to go with me. I didn't ask my mom to take off work and for her to come, because I was like, I don't want to, make her take off time and then she's not getting paid, and then I won't win the, she'll make the trip for nothing. So anyhow, I won, surprise. And then I was having difficulty writing, right? Because every time I would sit down in front of the computer, I would think about audience, I think in ways that I hadn't thought about before. And I would wonder if people would want me to write another Salvage the Bones, right? Like, what do people want from me? Do they want more of that? What does that mean? What will that look like in a story? And I couldn't write. And so I went to a conference in the spring after I won the NBA, and I just happened to run into Nikki Finney, right, who was the poet who won her collection of poetry, won the NBA in poetry that year. That I won Salvage the Bones. And what's funny is that at the ceremony, we were sitting, both our tables were next to each other, and we were all the way in the back of the hall, right? So as far as you can get away from the stage, that's where we were sitting.
So you knew you weren't going
to
win, right?
Right. And she had her whole family with her, right? And I had no family with me. And because we were sitting next to each other, they sort of took me under their wing. They're like, oh, you don't have family with you? We're going to be your family, right?
That community culture, that community, once again.
And so it was,
she's so lovely, and her family, they're so warm and welcoming. So I was very excited to run into her at this conference. And so one of the first, we had a conversation, and one of the things that she asked me, she's like, so how is, are you writing? How's the writing going? And I told her, I was like, I'm not writing at all. I don't know what to do. And I told her that I was, sort of twisting myself into knots because all I could think about was audience. And she said, so she asked me, she said, what did it feel like when you sat down to write your book, to write Salvage the Bones? Like, what were the emotions that you felt? What did it feel like? And I thought about it, and I thought, that the emotion that motivated me when I sat down to write that story specifically was love. Love for those characters and love for that world. Like, that's what I felt. That feeling of love sort of overwhelmed everything else, right? My anxiety, the questions that I have about whether or not I was doing it right or getting it right? I just felt love, right? And so she said, okay, embrace that, right? Forget about all this. None of this matters. Forget about the awards, forget about the audience, just forget about all of that. The next time you sit down at the computer, embrace that emotion. Return to that feeling. She said, and then it'll come. And she was right. I went back, when I sat down, with the blank page in front of my computer, I embraced that emotion, and I was able to write. And so that's one of the reasons why anytime that I am recognized in any sort of way, right? If I get a certificate or an award or a trophy or anything like that, I bring it all to my mom's house. So my mom has all of it.
So it doesn't distract
Yeah, right.
you
So it
from
doesn't
the work.
distract me.
Yeah.
Even my own books, I hide them from myself, right? In the room that I work in, I have everyone else's books. I have all these bookshelves, right? It's filled up with other writers, right? And my books, I hide them so that I can't see them, because it makes it easier for me to sink into the fictional world that I'm writing about.
That's a perfect note. I could sit here all day with this woman. We have 1 minute and 45 seconds. I said I was going to give you 6 minutes. Does anyone have a question for her? Yes, sir.
Yes. What is your next book about? When will it be published? Why did you decide to write about that story?
And so for all of you in the back, the question was, when is your next book coming out? What is it going to be about? And can I get a copy of it?
I don't know exactly when my next book will be coming out, or will come out. So I've been under contract to write a middle grade or YA book for years, right? Because I signed a 2-book deal, for the novel that eventually became Let Us Descend, and then for this YA middle grade book, right? Which years and years passed, and I hadn't written any of it at all. And so recently, that's the book that I have been working on, but normally I work on one book at one time. Like, I just dedicate all my focus. I focus on one story, but I can't do that right now because there's another book that, an adult, like a literary novel.
Crowding your head?
Yes.
Yeah.
That needs to be, I have to do it. And so for the first time in my writing life, I'm actually working on 2 books at the same time. So I'm working on, this kids' YA book, which is fantastic, and there are magical elements to it. And I'm also working on this literary novel.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jesmyn Ward.